Video, we're going to go over the Revit user interface. We're going to start on the Revit home screen, then we're going to go to the user interface overview for when you're designing a Revit project. We're going to talk about what a Revit project is and how it relates to the one model, many views concept, and then we're going to finish it off with creating a project of your own. So let's get started. So when you open up Revit for the first time, you're going to get the Revit home screen. And what the Revit home screen is it's a quick way to open a recent project that you may have been working on, as well as creating a new one. So you can see up here in the top left-hand corner, I have the option to create a new model, Revit model, or open an existing one. And you want to think of a Revit model that's essentially either a structure. So a building, bridge pylon, something like that, that would be a Revit model. A Revit family, as you can see right here, I have also the option to open it or create a new one. We're going to go into more detail about the family hierarchy when it relates to Revit in the future video, but for right now you can think of a Revit family as a collection of elements that you can create to be used in multiple Revit projects, such as like a door would be an example of a Revit family, because you might create it once and use it in multiple projects. Over here on the right, you have your recent files. So any files that you've been working on previously in Revit, whether it be a model or a family, are going to show up here. So that's the Revit home screen, and it opens up every single time you open up Revit. So I'm going to hop into an actual project now. Okay. So while that's opening up, this is just a sample one right now, and this is the Revit modeling user interface. It has a bunch of different UI elements, and we're going to go through them right now. The first is the Quick Access Toolbar. If you've ever used a Microsoft product before, such as Word or Excel, you're familiar with the Quick Access Toolbar. Essentially, it's a bar where you can store, by default, it stores commands that Autodesk thinks are going to be useful to you, but you can also pin any command to the Quick Access Toolbar whenever you want to make it easily accessible in the future. One we're going to be using a lot is the little house icon, which automatically pulls up the 3D view of the model that you're working on. But all these other ones you can remove or add as you see fit. The next thing we're going to talk about is the status bar, which is located in the lower left-hand corner. The status bar, I like to think of it as a hint bar. So essentially, if you're ever not sure what Revit's waiting for or why something's not getting done, check the status bar. It gives you a lot of hints about what the software is waiting for and what you can do in Revit's current state. So you'll notice if I hop, I'm going to hop to the level 1 plan. Don't worry about how you get there. We'll talk about that in a second. And I was creating a wall. You can see that the status bar says click to enter wall start point, telling me that Revit is waiting to create a wall. Okay, moving on, the File tab. The File tab over here is what you click on when you want to open a new project, open a project or create a new project, save, do a save as well as export and print a current project that you're working in. You'll notice you also have a recent documents will tell you any projects that you've been working on recently on your computer. And you can also pin them so that to reference them in the future. You also have access to the options dialog box, which we'll be covering in a later video. So that's the File button. The next is a series of tabs along the top here. So you can see the tabs each have names, such as architectural, structure, steel, systems, etc. Okay, every single command in Revit is associated with a ribbon tab, but not only that, they're sorted by panels. So you can see right here on the architectural tab, I have a panel called build. And inside of that, there's these little commands, and at the end of the panel for build, there's this little thin gray line, which represents the end of that panel. So when I'm trying to tell you guys how to create a wall, for instance, I would say, go to the architectural tab in the build panel and select the wall button. And you could navigate to that because you see the architectural tab, the build panel, and then the wall button. And so that's how I'm going to inform you guys on what button we're using to create a certain element. And so just so you know, so you have ribbon tabs, then you have panels, and then you have ultimately commands, and you can have drop downs and commands for different variants of a certain command, but just so you know how that's structured. Now, Revit is a contextual based software, meaning that elements of the UI are going to change based on what you're doing. So I'm going to show you that what I mean by that right now. So let's say I'm creating a wall. So create a wall, and you can notice that on the top, a lot of stuff just went green. So what happened? The first is it created a contextual tab called Modify Place Wall. And a contextual tab is just a tab that appears in a certain context. In this case, the contents of placing a wall. Different commands and different elements that you're creating could have different contextual tabs. So they're not always going to look like this, but they're going to vary based on the context of how you're using Revit. The next element I want to talk about is this options bar, which shows up right below the ribbon. So you can see right here, this is the option bar, and there's the options inside the option bar are going to change based on what you're doing. In the case of the wall, it asks things like, what's the height of the wall? How do you want to create it? Is there an offset? Do you want your walls to be chained together? And we're going to go over all of those when we actually create them. So contextual options bar in addition to a contextual tab. Okay. So I'm going to get out of the wall command right now, and I'm going to return to just standard vanilla AutoCAD. And you can notice that because I'm no longer creating a wall, that contextual tab disappeared. So we've talked about up here about the ribbon and the different tabs within the ribbon and the panels and the commands, as well as the contextual tabs and options bar. Now let's talk about the properties palette. The properties palette is located on the right-hand side, or it might be docked on the left-hand side, depending on if you've changed your configuration from when Revit was first open. It contains information about any element you have selected on screen. So for instance, if I select this column, you can see it gives me all sorts of information about the column, what level it's created on or it's tied to, if it has any sort of offsets, what type of column. In this case, it's a M concrete round column with drop caps, etc. The properties palette is something we're going to be in and out of a lot throughout this entire semester, and it's because it's so powerful. It contains the I, or the information, in the word BIM, and it helps you interact with elements on screen by adjusting their properties. So that's what the properties palette does and how we're going to be using it in the future. On the left is the project browser. And before I go into the project browser, I kind of want to talk about Revit projects in general and kind of that one model, many views. So I'm going to hop over to the 3D view of this Revit project. And you can see this is the model I'm interacting with. And you notice that when I was in the level 1 plan, this is what the level 1 plan of this actual 3D model works like. But it's not just a representation, they're interconnected. And what do I mean by that? Let's say I went to the level 1 plan and I deleted a wall. So I'm going to select this wall right here and I'm going to delete it. Okay? Now when I go to the 3D model, you'll notice that the wall down here disappeared. And that's because that one model, many view concept, where all the views are interconnected. So if I delete it in the 3D model, it's going to update in any section that I have, any elevation that I have, any floor plan that I have. And because of this interconnectedness, it ensures that all your views represent each other. However, this can sometimes cause a little bit of confusion because of all these interconnected elements. If you delete something in one view, it's going to update in the other one. So if you had like annotations associated with that, it's also going to delete that. But the coordination between elements doesn't just stop between views in the 3D model, it also relates to sub-elements. So what does I mean by that? Let's take this wall right here, okay? You'll notice I select the wall and I'm going to delete it. But you'll notice that not only the wall disappears, but all the windows that were associated with those walls. This interconnectiveness, or this, this connection between these two elements is also what makes Revit a powerful BIM software. Those windows were assigned to those walls or hosted by the walls. And so by deleting the wall, I deleted the windows as well. And yes, it's going to update them in my level 2 plans or my elevations, etc., but it also deleted those windows. And that's what I mean when I talk about, yeah, you have one model, many views, but it kind of goes a little bit further than that. It's because elements can be associated to other elements such as doors to walls and ceiling tiles to ceilings, and etc. So that's a quick overview of the one model, multiple views concept. Now let's talk about how it relates to the project browser. The project browser allows you to easily switch between the different floor plans you have. So whether you want to jump to a quick elevation of the east side of the building, jump to a section that you may have created, jump to a detailed view that you've created that's just of, like in this case, the stairwell. It allows you to easily jump between the multiple different views of a given Revit model that you're working with. And of course, you have your 3D views as well which is what I'm looking at right here. But it does so much more than that. It doesn't just act as a spot to store your views, it also stores your sheets. So if you have any professional drawing sheets that you've created from your views, you can see right here, this is the level 1 and level 2 plans or views placed on a sheet, and you would have your multiple sheets stored, and you can navigate to them in the project browser. In addition, you'd have it's where you store your Revit families. Like I said, we're going to touch on that in a future video, as well as your Revit groups. And so that's something I want to make sure we talk about. Okay, because I've got multiple stuff open, you may have noticed when I was clicking on stuff, they open up in new tabs along here. And each one of these tabs represent another view, sheet, or whatever I've opened from the project browser. And they're all still interconnected. They're not independent of each other, all tied together because they're all representing similar geometry. In the case of the stairs, it's just a small piece of the entire model, but it's still tied, meaning if I delete the railings here, it's going to delete it in 3D, even though it might be kind of hard to see because I'm looking through the building right now. And we'll go into different ways you can adjust view elements in future videos. So these tabs along the top can make it really useful if you're trying to work on something in one view and see how it's going to represent in the 3D view or another view, and vice versa. So how can you close these views? Well, that can be done by either clicking on them with your middle mouse button or clicking the X to next to them, and that will close a given view. Now keep in mind, you're all in the same project, so closing a view doesn't close a project. You'd have to close all the tabs to close the project and return back to the home screen. Now let's say you wanted to view these things side by side. We're going to jump into the View ribbon tab right here, and you have some options over here. You have the option to tile your views, which will take all the views that you have open and tile them. And you can see right here, I have every single view. And this can be useful if you're, like I said, instead of switching back and forth, you can actually see how in real time by deleting something or modifying something, how it affects everything else. And so that can be useful if you like to tile your views. I'm not a huge fan of that. I prefer tab views, but to each their own. I want to make sure you're aware of that. And of course, you have your switch windows button right here, which makes it a little bit easier if you had more tabs open than can fit on your screen. You can use this to jump between them all. Because once you fill out the top of this, it starts compressing them, and you have to kind of go to the you click a drop down arrow to select different ones. We'll get to that more when we go into viewing a project in detail. Okay, so that talks a little bit about tabs, how to delete them, how to close them. One thing I want to mention on this too is if you have multiple Revit projects open, or Revit models open, if you will, they're also going to show up as tabs here. And so the name of your tab, you'll notice it says level 1. If I had another Revit project, it probably has a level 1 too. So sometimes it can be difficult to tell which level 1 that's pertaining to if I had like a second building open. It can be helpful to just hover over it, and you can actually see that it has the name of the project and then hyphen the actual name of the view that you're in, whether it be a 3D view, sheet, etc. So that can be pretty useful right there. Okay, next element I want to talk about is the navigation bar, which we're going to get in more detail here. And this is to assist with zooming and panning and kind of navigating the view that you're currently in. And last but certainly not least is our view control bar. And the view control bar contains a lot of commands that help you adjust your view. And these can relate to things about how it looks, its visual style, so you can change it to a wireframe to kind of get more faster performance, or more realistic approach, which is heavier on your CPU, so kind of use that sparingly, as well as the option to adjust how things view on your screen and whatnot. So, kind of giving you big overview of the entire user interface of Revit, just kind of a top level overview of it. And we're actually getting into more creating elements such as walls, windows, etc. You'll get more practice with interacting with the Revit user interface. So, okay, one last thing I want to mention is how to create a new project. To begin from the Revit home screen, you can simply click the New button under Models, and then you can select a template file. We'll go into a little bit more in detail what a template file is when we actually start our first project and assignment next week. But you select a template, and then you select whether you want to create a new template or a project. I'm going to select no template for right now, and then I'm just going to click OK. It's going to ask me which system of measurement I would like to use. I'm going to say Imperial for this case, and then it's going to generate me some basic views, as well as it'll have no sheets inside there right now. You can see I've got some structural plans, floor plans, and some ceiling plans, and there's nothing in it because it's an empty project, but that's how you would create a brand new project. So in subsequent videos, we'll create a new project and actually start drawing some walls and such.